Good evening, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Katie from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with Deborah Copaken, launching her new book, Ladyparts. She will be talking with Tad Friends, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Deborah, Tad, and the team at Random House for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. If we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. There's just a few housekeeping things to go over before we get started. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and you can see a count of fellow attendees at the top of your Zoom screen, but the exact location will depend on what kind of device you're using. And there are a couple of different ways that you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and to interact with fellow attendees. So if you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that in the Q&A module, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program, so please make sure you're putting your questions there and not in the chat. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Ladyparts, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person in our bookstore locations from 12 p.m. to 7 p.m. every day of the week, and you can purchase Deborah's book and many others on site. Or you can order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll be dropping the buy link in the chat in just a moment. Deborah stopped by our store to sign copies of the book so you can get a signed book by request while supplies last. Make sure to indicate your signed copy request in the order comments at checkout when ordering online, or look for signed copies when you visit the store. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Our interviewer tonight is Tad Friends. A staff writer for The New Yorker since 1998, he writes the magazine's Letter from California. His book about his relationship with his father in the early times will come out next year. He won the 2020 James Beard Award for Best Feature Reporting, and his work has been republished in the Best Technology Writing, the Best American Travel Writing, the Best American Sports Writing, and the Best American Crime Reporting. His story, Jumpers, on the people who commit suicide at the Golden Gate Bridge was turned into the documentary film The Bridge and inspired the Sleater-Kinney song Jumpers. His memoir, Cheerful Monday, Me and My Family in the Last Days of Lost Splendor, was chosen as one of the year's best books by the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, the San Francisco Chronicle, and NPR. He will be speaking with our featured author, Deborah Copaken. She is the New York Times bestselling author of several books, including Shutter Babes, The Red Book, and Between Here and April. A contributing writer at The Atlantic, she is also a Golden Globe nominated TV writer for Netflix's Emily in Paris, performer at The Moth, etc., and a former Emmy Award-winning news producer and photojournalist. Her photographs have appeared in Time, Newsweek, and The New York Times. Her writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Guardian, The Financial Times, The Observer, The Wall Street Journal, The Nation, Slate, O, The Oprah Magazine, and Paris Match, among others. Her column, When Cupid is a Prying Journalist, was adapted for the Modern Love streaming series. Her new book, Ladyparts, is a frank, witty, and dazzlingly written memoir of one woman trying to keep it together while her body falls apart. Deborah will be talking with Tad, and then afterwards, they will be talking with all of you. Please take it away, Deborah and Tad.
Hi, everyone. I just vaguely was looking at some of the participants, and nice to see so many familiar names. Thank you for joining us. And I'm just going to give it over to Tad to moderate. Thank you, Tad.
Thanks. Moderation implies like there's like 7 or 8 people that I have to deal with, but luckily it's just my old friend Deb. We've been friends since college, which is a number of years ago. It's great to see you today, Deb. I love the book. You begin the book with bloody things falling out of you onto the floor. They turn out to be blood clots from a sort of botched cervix removal surgery. But is this also kind of a metaphor, an emblem for the act of writing a memoir, having bloody things fall out of you onto the floor?
You know, I had never actually thought about that until just now. So thank you for pointing that out. What I actually thought of those bloody pieces as was really, the bleed out took place on the 4th of July. And the book begins at the 4th of July, 2017, and it ends on the 4th of July, 2020. And to me, this was just kind of America coming out of me. You know, that America has failed its women. It's failed us in healthcare. It's failed us in childcare. It's failed us in maternity leave. It's failed us time and again in literally every phase of our lives. And now it fails us in menopause as well. It failed to tell me that this would even be an issue. Vaginal cuff dehiscence. I'd never heard that term before. But so for me, it's kind of, the bleeding out is the moment that things really fall apart, and the moment when what had happened to me because of literally political policies came to a head.
So this section of the book, the opening section of the book is titled Vagina, and we go on to uterus and then breast and then brain and other body parts. Tell me about the moment where it came to you to like decide, oh, you know what, I'm going to write a memoir that's going to be body part by body part. Like how did, I don't think I've seen that before, and it must have struck you as an original idea, but like, how did you decide this is actually, this is the best way to tell my story of the last, you picture it as sort of 4 years, but it actually goes back in time a fair amount. I think of it as almost a decade, really. It's kind of the end of your marriage, and you're struggling a lot and finding yourself very slowly and getting knocked down a lot. But it's really kind of a decade, in my mind, a kind of decade story. But you tell it body part by body part, and then so therefore you move around in time and you kind of see it through the lens of different parts of you. How did that come to you?
I'd been trying to write some version of this book in so many different ways over the years as it was happening, right? In medias res, I was trying to write a book called Yes and, about the powers of improv and of saying yes and to the world. That never sold. I had basically given up on ever writing again. I wasn't able to sell a book. I didn't think I would ever sell a book again. I was getting older women, I literally was told again and again, people aren't interested in a middle-aged woman's memoir. But then I was standing in the shower one day and I was kind of looking down at all the scars on my body, and they're not big, they're not ugly, they're just there, right? There's just lots of little holes where robot arms went in and pulled shit out. And as I was looking down at the scars, I thought, well, that's my uterus and that's my cervix. And oh my God, this is how I should write this memoir. I mean, as you know, you've just finished writing a memoir. The hardest part of writing one is coming up with the structure. How am I going to tell this story, right? Am I going to tell it linearly? Am I going to tell it weaving back and forth? I mean, I've always, even in Shutter Babe, I like telling stories in a present tense so that you can move back and forth in time. Like you can have future verbs and past tense verbs but your action is going along in the present tense. And the body parts not only allowed me to tell the story because, you could sort of track time by those stories in the same way, like with Shutter Babe, each man was a different chapter because they represented a period of time. But also, as I was standing in the shower, it sort of struck me that each body part also was metaphorically rich for that period of time. So for example, uterus, right? My uterus was removed at literally the same hour that Sasha got her period, my daughter got her period, and Nora was dying and ended up dying the next day. And Nora was my mentor, but she also sort of stood in as my New York mom, right? And she was somebody I went to with my problems and I would go to with, marital issues and work issues and help me edit this. And, she was very maternal to me. And so the idea of losing a uterus while you lose kind of this maternal figure and your daughter gets your period on the same day, that was kind of a crazy coincidence. Or my heart went on the fritz and I started wearing a heart monitor, a Holter monitor, which has like little sticky things all over your body. And while I was wearing this Holter monitor, I also was going on Tinder dates. And so I was kind of trying to hide the Holter monitor from my Tinder dates. But, the idea of your heart being broken and putting your heart back out there again. And each chapter worked that way.
So one of the things that's very striking about the book is the ambition of it. It's not just your story, it seems to me, but it's also, you connect with a lot to other women and kind of, to me anyway, pitch it as kind of the story of women in America.
Yeah.
And what gave you the confidence to do that? First of all, I think if I were trying to write a male companion book, it would be very short because men don't have that many interesting body parts. Like you got your penis in your head, and that's about it. It's like 2 chapters, and no one would be that interested. But what gave you the confidence to think like I can, I think I'm not just telling my story here, but maybe the story of many women.
When I first started writing, and I think even in the book proposal, I wasn't so sure about my ability to do that. So I didn't actually pitch it as, this is not just the story of me, this is the story of American women. But as I kept writing it, and as I kept researching, I'd find out things like only 20% of OBGYN residents, only 20% of OBGYN residents have any formal training in menopausal medicine. That was a shocking number to me. I didn't know that number. And only 16% of them have any, they do any work in a, and I want to say lab, but I can't come up with the word. It's not lab, but they do work in a clinic, sorry. And so as I kind of uncovered stone by stone of other women going through these things, statistics that were really outrageous. And then, in the midst of this all, COVID hits, right? And there's a headline that was shocking to me, and I'm sure to other women, and it was 140,000 people lost their jobs in December of 2020. All of them were women, not just like 78%. All of them were women. And so it was kind of in the course of writing the book that I realized that I needed to expand it. It couldn't just be about me. I had to put in these statistics. I had to put the policy issues in. I was explaining it today to someone as like, when you grind up vegetables to put in your kids' mac and cheese, like that had to be in there. You had to have a dollop of what's really going on with women to kind of understand why I was in the place I was in. Paying outrageous sums for Cobra, being kicked off my health insurance because some Cobra hiccup that I forgot to send in something at certain time or whatever it was. America makes you work really, really hard just to keep your head above water. And childcare costs, going on maternity leave and going into debt at maternity leave, $9,000 for each baby. Like, it shouldn't cost us $9,000 to have a baby, right? We should, that our healthcare in any other country that is similar to ours in economics treats healthcare as a right, not a privilege. We treat healthcare as a privilege, not a right. And the pharmaceutical lobby is the largest, it pays the most amount of money to really get their word out there, and we pay the price.
A lot of that comes through very powerfully in the book, and you kind of turn your fire on a number of fat cats, which is satisfying to me as a reader. And I think a lot of readers will like. Who doesn't like to see a fat cat get fired on? But I think there's an undernote of sorrow and anxiety in the book where we feel you kind of falling out of the upper middle class. Essentially, here you are, you're bright, smart, creative person who can, comes up with lots of ideas, is super energetic, anyone would love to hire. You went to an Ivy League school, and then we sort of see you gradually kind of like really struggling and falling, the safety net has holes in it and you're falling through them. Was there a point in your life where you felt like you suddenly realized that, or was it such a slow drip of affliction that you kind of just got used to it?
I think it kind of happened all at once I turned, 47, 48. And you really felt the effects of being put out to pasture as a woman. I have a lot of contacts in the media world. I don't lack for contacts. I could not get hired to save my life. And I mean literally to save my life. There was a moment where I was suicidal. Like, I could not get hired at a decent salary to save my life. Now, that's also because the media industry crumbled under the weight of Facebook and Google, right? Google ads, Facebook, that killed our industry. So while I'm trying to get hired, there are people being fired left and right. So that was, bad timing, but also, I just wasn't getting called back. I wasn't getting emailed back. I was sending hundreds of resumes out into the void. And when I finally did get a job, at, I can't even name the place because I'm not allowed because of an NDA, but at a health magazine, an online health magazine. It wasn't really a health magazine. It was it was an ad. It was a system for throwing pharmaceutical ads out there with some content. So it was like the tail wagging the dog, in magazines, if you're going to diss McDonald's, you can still have McDonald's ads in your magazine. I mean, McDonald's might not want to advertise with you anymore, but you're not going to not publish a story about how bad McDonald's food is because you're worried about losing those ad dollars. In the magazine I was working for, it was the exact opposite. The ads dictated the content to the point where I was told, we don't care about type 1 diabetes. We only care about type 2 because they have really good pharmaceutical interventions. So to answer your question though, that fall was slow and steady until it was steep. And when it was steep, I mean, there was one point where I had $18 in my bank account. I was waiting for 3 freelance payments to come through. I was at a farmer's market. I was weighing my apples. I saw that my apples were going to cost $6. And I realized I cannot spend a third of my net worth on apples. Right. And I ended up, selling my engagement ring because that was the only asset I had,
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's, the book reads almost like the movie Speed, where like things are constantly happening. You just can't go below 50 miles an hour. Everything's gonna blow up. And it's like, I was thinking like, you had more happen to you in the last 10 years than I hope to ever have happened to me. Like it was, it's constant. There's firings and terrible dates and, sexual harassment and medical emergencies, one after another. And have you, are you the modern Job, or what's happening? Why, have you given thought to like, why me? Because it seems after a while that it's kind of almost, unbelievable. I know because I was your friend and I was there for all it happened. I'm not saying it, but I'm just saying like it mounts up to an extent that seems that in a screenplay you would say, well, maybe they should have this one scene where they like have coffee and they talk and it's quiet. It's because there's constantly things crashing.
Well, that's because I left out all the times I was sitting at your and Amanda's table, breathing and crying and breathing. I think I did mention it once in the book, but friends like you sustained me during an incredibly difficult time. I don't know why so many things happened to me. The only thing I can come up with, and it's, again, in retrospect, is that maybe I was meant to write this ridiculous account of them. Like it was, not that my book's ridiculous, but right. The cascade of horrors, right, was unbearable. I don't know other word. It was literally unbearable. And, but I also do think, again, I'm going to go back to America and policy, that if I had been living in Paris, where I used to live, I would have not had to figure out how to get a breast exam at the breast center of Harlem. I found a free breast exam at the breast center of Harlem. In Paris, I would have gotten a note every 6 months or a year saying it's time for your mammogram, and then you'd go for your free mammogram. I would not have had to deal with Sasha's birth control pills, which kept getting, mangled in transit, or I didn't know what was going on, but they were like, oh yeah, we're not paying for that anymore. Or even recently, so here's a new chapter that is not in the book, but I got my COVID vaccine, right? And I got something called SIRVA, shoulder injury, blah, blah, blah. But I had frozen shoulder as a result of my second COVID vaccine. So I had to get a shot in my arm, but then they said, okay, now you need 6 weeks of physical therapy. But I can't do the 6 weeks of physical therapy because my insurance doesn't pay for it. So, it's just this constant like fighting for what we should all be allowed to do. And, mental health is one of those too, right? Why are only wealthy people able to have access to mental health? It's absurd. It's outrageous. And at one point I was looking into the Lithuanian right of return because my grandmother is from Lithuania. And I thought, well, maybe I can get an EU passport, move back to Paris, and just like, at least some of this will be over.
Well, a question that occurred to me is like, if you let's play out that thought experiment. If you had, instead of being here for the last 10 or 20 years, if you'd been in Paris, where they have daycare and they have healthcare and they have those charming men with the 2 days double and so forth that you could have dated, would you have been better off? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, your enemy structural? Is it just that America's totally screwed up? Or is it more existential in the fact that you're a woman, and the book is a lot about women versus, women's status versus men's? Or is it just being a human being? Like Job, was a man and he had a host of problems too. I mean, not that you don't have to necessarily pick one, because all of us, there's many things that harass and oppress and put all of us down. But what do you think is the main sort of target, if there is one, in
it's America? I really do feel that it's American policy. Being a woman is definitely up there. Discrimination, sexual harassment. There was a time when I thought I had a job at the Observer, and then it was taken away from me, and I would soon learn that it was because the boss wanted to sleep with me. And being a woman in America feels like you're constantly being gaslit. You're saying, this is happening to me, and nobody cares and nobody will listen. And like, I got fired from that health magazine because I was spending too much time at Sloan Kettering. I had stage 0 breast cancer, like the least scary breast cancer you can have. In fact, one doctor diagnosed stage 0, another doctor diagnosed atypia, which is even less worse. And yes, I spent 9 afternoons at Sloan Kettering, but like, those were my only absences. And when I was fired, I was told, you've been spending too much time away from the office. And I showed him, in another country, in Paris, for example, a Scandinavian country, you can't just fire someone for going to doctor's visits, especially in a health magazine, for goodness sakes. But I don't think you can kind of separate out. I think that there's kind of the overarching Job thing, right? Which was just a lot of bad luck. And then there's America under that, and then there's being a woman under that, and there's no way of unbraiding those things. They are braided tightly together.
If you were put in charge of America, which would, I'm sure, actually help a lot, and I would applaud that if there's a way to do it, would you go after the political system and just try to get a reasonable healthcare system for all? Would you go after sort of a mindset, which a number of times in the book you point out that, look, studies that that affect women's health are slighted or downplayed or not followed up on by other studies, and that there's sort of this overall idea that, like, what happens to women and their body parts doesn't really matter as much as guys and that cool stuff. So where would your priorities be? What would you do first?
Healthcare first. 100% healthcare first. I think once we fix our healthcare system and we create a system of yes, socialized medicine, don't be afraid of that word. Every other country has it. And, Rob Delaney, who was in Catastrophe and is just a brilliant actor and writer, he moved to London, I think, for his work. And then his son died during the middle of this. And he said the NHS took care of his son, and the NHS, which is the National Health System of Great Britain, is the reason he will stay in London, because it works, because he doesn't have to worry all the time about where's the next money going to come from for this Cobra payment. I mean, my Cobra payments were $2,400 a month. It's like, that's another rent. That is an insane amount of money. So I would go after the health insurance system first, and I would just get rid of health insurance altogether and create a nationalized health care system. My daughter, I just dropped her off at medical school. She's on board with that, as are all of her compatriots. And I'm hoping that this generation of doctors stands up and says, this is not about, buying the Porsche, it's about saving lives. Maybe they'll make a little less money, but we can't have a system where people, during COVID, rich people stayed alive and poor people died. We saw that. The statistics don't lie. So after I would deal with health insurance, I would go after childcare. So I would have, like in Paris or Norway or Denmark or Sweden, they have crèche, which is a system where the child's 1 year old, you put them in the crèche. The crèche costs the same amount as a sliding scale. So you pay for childcare, like my friend Marion, who's working at Paris Match and earning a pretty great salary. Marion. When her daughter Lulu went into crèche at a year old, I think Marion was paying the equivalent of $25 a week for her childcare. And it was excellent childcare, and it went until 6 or 7 p.m. And you could, and then I would just stop these like ambulance bills. I mean, I didn't call the ambulance when I was bleeding out with these giant chunks of viscera, because I was afraid that I would get charged $4,000 for the ambulance, which is not unheard of.
When you and I were talking about doing this event tonight, I sort of tried to beg off by saying, like, I'm kind of the guy who comes off work, not personally, but like the thing I represent, being a middle-aged white dude, they don't come off that well in the book. There's a lot of bad dudes in the book. In fact, I felt worse about being a dude as I read your book. Was there a point where you ever thought about, like, you know what, screw it, I'm over men entirely, they suck?
Yes, but I'm not attracted to women. It's unfortunate, because it would have been nice to like be gay. I really
felt like in a parallel universe, yeah, you would end up, you would think, like, you know what, men just they've blown it. They don't have a chance at me anymore.
But then there are men like you, Tad. I mean, and truly, I have to say it, because one of the things that kept me going during this whole time was seeing you and Amanda, and seeing your marriage, and seeing some of my other friends' marriages up close, and knowing that a good marriage and good men were possible, right? And, I think it was Rick Moody read this book, and he was just like, I had no idea. And I did not write this book for white dudes, but it made me realize his reaction, your reaction, a bunch of other white dudes' reactions, that I want you guys to read this book. I want you to understand what it means to live in a woman's body. And I think we try to tell men, we try to explain to them what it means to fear rape all the time. Like, you can't, how you've been fearing COVID for a year and a half? Imagine fearing rape your entire, post-adolescent life. Constantly, you get out of a subway at 1 o'clock in the morning and you think, I hope I'm safe. And I've been raped, so I know that it is possible. It's just a completely different thing to live in a woman's body. And I'm hoping, one of the, the surprise byproducts of this is getting men to read the book and getting them to understand.
Well, I think, men are generally cowards, so I hope that it works and they will man up and read it. But there are some good dudes in the book, and they show up toward the end and help you in various ways. And you're obviously living now with no spoilers. But Barack Obama, no, it's not Barack Obama. But you're living with a very nice man. And I wondered if your view of men had evolved at all or changed either in the course of writing the book or in the course of just living the last 10 years, where you started off in a difficult marriage that was falling apart, and eventually you got divorced, not without a lot of struggle on the way, and having to pay your ex's bills and enduring a lot from him. So that was probably one of the low points, but then there were other low points later on in your dating life and in sexual harassment. just and also just general obliviousness to your state from a lot of people. And did you feel like that's still true, and you just happened to find people who were, better, or did you feel like you evolved in a certain way that made you find those people?
So I remember you saying something to me years and years and years ago, where you were joking about my dad was a complete optimist, and I feel like I am in many ways my dad's child, and so far as I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. And you said something like, Deb is like Ivan the Terrible, not so terrible, that I give people too much benefit of the doubt. And I think that stuck in my head, this idea, and it was a joke and it was funny and I laughed, but it took me longer than it should have, to mature in that way and to understand that not everybody has my best interests at heart, and that I need to be more wary. And I think that's hard for someone like me that lives heart open, right? I want to embrace others. I love people. I love friends. I love sitting around a dinner table, enjoying a meal together. I love, and I want all those things. And it took me a long time to give up that trust and to learn to be a tiny bit more wary. And I'm 55 right now, and I kind of feel like I'm not yet there. I'm still learning, and I'm still struggling to not just put my heart straight out there.
I think there are times in the book when I as a reader would feel like you were justifiably angry or incensed at someone, and then like 2 sentences later you would be either taking the blame for it because you'd put them in an awkward position, or you'd be like, on the other hand, they too must have suffered, and you'd be like, no, fuck them, like they suck. and that's my thing. And I just wondered whether, like, on the one hand, your empathy enabled you to write this wonderful book, but do you ever feel like, following up on what you were just saying, like you have, like empathy can be a curse, or that it can kind of disarm you in such a way as to make you open to being wounded?
100%. And that is something that I was dealing with in therapy for many years, of over empathizing with people, even people who've done terrible things to me. And it's really, really hard for me to step back from that and say, this person is not deserving of my empathy. And even when I do say it, I still don't believe it. I mean, I'm still my dad's daughter, this kind of like constant optimist that wants to believe in the goodness of people and has found it in friends like you. And, I want to tell a little story, which is when I'd gotten my cervix out, I was by myself for a while, and, lifting trash and doing all kinds of things I shouldn't have been doing because I should have had a home health aide there or somebody. But a friend that I had met on Facebook, a woman named Cindy Kaplan, who we'd met for lunch once, maybe twice in our lives, didn't know each other really well, but liked each other and got really busy after these lunches, right? She came over with a craniosacral therapist, which is somebody that just does all sorts of things with your head and your feet and your body. And there's just like this incredible act of care, right? This unbelievable kind gesture from someone who was not a stranger to me, but wasn't in my close circle of friends. And I've just kind of never forgotten that, and will always hold those memories tight to keep believing in humanity. And I have to. I mean, I have to believe in humanity. I have to.
Yeah, I don't think you'd be you if you suddenly stopped. But I think one of the things about the reader's empathy for you is there are many points where you kind of want to say, like, no, don't do that. Like, like that sounds like a bad guy. He's not, and that the fact that you kind of pull us in and make us want to, like actually physically like call you up in the middle of the book and say, I hope you're not going to do that thing that we know you're going to do in the next 2 paragraphs is a sign of an engaging book. But it's also, I think, as you just said, has led to some sorrow on your part, and that comes through as well.
Yeah, I mean, I should regret more, and I don't regret anything. I feel like each bad situation taught me something new. I mean, that sounds so pablomy, but yeah, I feel like each bad boyfriend, each bad situation, each bad job has slowly been teaching me what I want out of life. And I have not that much left of it. You know, I have what, like I'm 55, so I don't have half of it left. I have less than half left, but hopefully those lessons seep into these years coming up. But, you know, it is important to note, and I want to note that, yes, I have a book coming out. And yes, I have won awards and had, you know, TV shows made out of my thing, but I'm collecting unemployment still. Like, I still haven't found a job. I haven't found a full-time job. And luckily Biden had a COBRA, I don't know what he called it, but, you know, sort of relief. So COBRA relief. So starting in April until September 1st, I haven't had to pay these COBRA bills. And that has been so incredible and so freeing, insofar as I wasn't like, okay, I have a book coming up and I've got to launch the book, but I also have to find this, you know, the next job now, or else I can't pay my health insurance.
So I want a couple more questions, and then, but if anyone who's watching wants to ask Deb a question, please put it in the Q&A, and I will, assuming it's not scurrilous or absurd, I will ask Deb. But so just a couple more things, Deb. You said, you know, you've learned from everything. Is there, and that, I think that has always been your attitude, which is admirable. And I wish I was as open about life as you are, honestly. Is there, if you could change, let's say, one thing that's happened over the years, is there, you know, just not the outlook, not the overall learning from setbacks, but just one thing that you could redo and maybe shift it a little bit, what would that be?
I mean, unfortunately, when I think about what could I have done differently, it really also depends on American policy. Like, so I wish I hadn't, it was impossible to have a full-time job and take care of 3 kids. Impossible. So I chose writing, which back in the day, you know, freelance writing paid the bills. You would write a 4,000 word article, you get $8,000 or sometimes $12,000, right? So I wish I hadn't stepped away for as long as I did and allowed myself to just rely on my ex-husband's health insurance and to not think about, I mean, who could think about the future of journalism? But, you know, I was earning a great living, writing books, writing articles, getting health insurance from my ex-husband. And then when that was gone, that's when things really fell apart, when I realized I am too old to get hired. Again, we need to change that. You know, men get hired into their 70s. Like, why is a 47-year-old woman put out to pasture? But I guess I would have thought very carefully about leaving myself without a safety net.
Is there, yeah, and I also like, this is perhaps like my totally New York real estate focused view, which should be discounted, therefore.
Right.
But like, when you and your ex-husband, who was then your husband, like left your apartment on Riverside, that seemed like it sort of began the downward journey in a way. Like,
Well, I mean, but that's also
having real estate in New York, or goodish real estate, is kind of, you know, the thing that allows you to do so many other things in New York.
right. So we owned one apartment, which we paid $225,000 for, and it was basically a 1-bedroom with like a tiny room that counted as a 2nd bedroom, but it really wasn't it wasn't enough room for 2 kids, for example. It was just like they were squished in there. So when it was time to get a basic 2-bedroom apartment, we couldn't afford the next step up. It was like we moved we were looking in 2000, 2001, and suddenly, our apartment hadn't really gained in any, gained that much in value because it was on the first floor. It smelled of bus fumes. It was not a great apartment, right? It was just like, nobody wanted it and people didn't pay what we wanted them to pay for it. And we couldn't afford the next step up. And I think that happens a lot. The next apartment we wanted to get was going to be 800,000 minimum. We weren't making enough to afford that. And so we ended up renting again. I think that we also forget that a lot of people in the upper middle class have family help with down payments, and so when you don't have that, it's kind of hard to buy a place.
Yeah. Well, so there's a question that came in, which is sort of in the same theme from Rachel. What advice would you give to your younger self? And other people, while Deb thinks about that, please do ask questions. This is the last chance you'll ever have to ask Deb a question. She is not going to answer any more questions from now on.
What would I say to my younger self?
What advice would you give? Yeah.
What advice would you give to your younger self? You're going to be okay. It's going to suck for a while, but maybe trust your gut a little more and trust people less.
Trust people less. How would that work in practice for you? What would you?
I mean, this is theoretical.
Yeah. All right. Well, no, I'm just curious.
Yeah, trust people less. Don't be so trusting that everyone has your best interest at heart, because oftentimes they don't.
True. While we're waiting for the shot, here comes another one. Thank God. Here's a question asking, did you have your ex-husband and your adult children read the book before it was published?
So my daughter was the one that appears in it most of all. My older son barely appears, and my younger son is kind of in there, but not as much as Sasha's really kind of the main character, because she saves my life in the first chapter. She's living with me as I'm going through all this stuff. And I said, do you want to read the book before it comes out? And she said, absolutely. And I want to be able to change things that I don't like. And I said, okay. And so she read and she made some adjustments. She made adjustments to dialogue. I wouldn't say it like this. I said it this way. And we really worked on it together. But I think if you have too many people telling you how to write, it's not your book anymore. Right. So I had to write the book I'd had to write. And I had to not be limited by, other people's edits.
Some of the names are changed of people in the book. I was interested, there was a couple people who I knew or knew of through you. You're not using their real names, but then their photographs are in the book. That's kind of
right. So Durkheim. So Durkheim is an old boyfriend of mine who was fine with me using his name, but because I'd chosen to not use the names of others, it just felt like a parallel structure that I had to choose, a fake name for him as well. But then that photo of him wearing the Observer t-shirt was kind of important because I had showed this to Ken Curson to say, I'm not going to wear the Observer t-shirt, but the boyfriend is. He would have been fine with me using his first name. A lot of times that was just a choice based on parallel structure.
Gotcha. Lisa asks, she says, first of all, you were one of the bravest women I know. That's true. My editorial comments, for what they're worth. How do you deal with the anxiety of facing so many health issues and so much financial insecurity and still say badass?
I think that you're born with that. You know what I mean? They're just you see kids on the playground that get bonked on the head and just keep on playing. And you see kids that get bonked slightly in the shoulder and start to cry, right? I think that that is baked into us. And again, I will say, like, you know, my dad was that way too. You know, things would happen to him and it would just roll off his back. And I don't know any other way to be. It's not like I'm trying to be resilient. I just am resilient.
Francine asks, do you ever feel that the "you can do anything you want to do" message we 55-year-old women hear is a fallacy?
Yeah, 100%. You as a 55-year-old woman, you are incredibly limited by others' views of you right now. Just try getting a job in this market. It's impossible. It's really impossible. You know, even like, you know, I love writing for The Atlantic and I have wonderful editors there, but there have been a couple times where I've reached out and said, hey, can you hire me full time? I'd really like health insurance. I'd like to be working there full time. And, you know, there's just never a spot for someone like me. There's always a spot for the younger people coming through, and they've hired a lot of people. Washington Post as well. You know, my roommate from college, Carolyn Hacks, who you know well, emailed me at one point and said, oh, they're doing all these hirings. Look at all the job listings. There's so many job listings. You know, I applied to all of them and I didn't get hired. And, you know, the people that they did hire were younger, less experienced, and I imagine probably cost less. And I understand that, but I can't get hired. I can't get hired. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I think when we had dinner a couple of weeks ago, you said to me and Amanda that you were tired of living by your wits. That, you know, it's exhausting to have to bounce from one thing to another and always cobble together, you know, a barely sustainable economic structure. It was just, you know, that having the old system of, like, you know, you go to work for a company and if you don't screw up, you get a gold watch at a certain point and you have a retirement fund. It's just, it's clearly broken. And it's particularly broken for people who are freelancers, you know, where there's just not.
I mean, I sold Ladyparts as a TV show. Hopefully that'll get made, but I know not to count those chickens at all, because we all know how many things say they're going to get made and then don't get made, you know. I don't, like, I literally, after this book launch, don't know what's in store for me. I've got to figure out a new plan, and it's scary.
Everyone buy Deb's book, in case you haven't gotten the message. A couple more. Ariana, who we both know, writes, how therapeutic was it to write about your experiences? Was there any specific event that seemed reframed afterwards? Perhaps an event or narrative you saw more clearly after you wrote about it, that you saw it in a different way, having written about it?
That's a great question. I don't think that the act of writing was therapeutic. I think that going to therapy was therapeutic. Going to therapy helped me frame what was happening to me in context. What happens after you write a memoir, that's the therapeutic part, right? Because it's not therapeutic as you're writing it. As you're writing it, you're in a muddle, and and for me, I was waking up at 5 a.m. every day to work on this because I had another job. So it was just like pumping out the words, pumping out the words, pumping out the words. It's only in retrospect, when you get the chance to actually read your book for the first, you know, page pass, that you realize, oh my God, I've just written this thing. You know, mine was, at the time, it was like 600 pages. I've somehow put into context some of the stuff that happened to me. That feels really great. And what happens is you get to put it on a shelf, right? You get to put these, I don't want to say annus horribilis, but like 10-year horribilis on a shelf and say, okay, it's in a little box, it's there, I can peek at it when I want to, and hopefully I can move forward into a less stressful existence. But I don't think I don't think I learned anything more about the events that I write about in the book, or was able to reframe them in any way. Because I just kept perseverating and talking about this with a shrink for so many hours that I I already understood where these events played out and how they played on my psyche.
Ariana, who has another question, she is, as you know, herself a writer and she has children, but she asks,
Hi, Ariana.
what advice would you give your child right now if they told you they wanted to be a writer?
Don't. I mean, there's just, there are very few sustainable ways of being a writer in the world right now. And that's a terrible thing to say, I know, but I would worry about a child of mine becoming a writer.
Yeah, when our daughter Addison, who was about 7 or 8, at breakfast one morning, she's like said to me, "Daddy, I think I want to be a poet." And I was like, "That's great, honey. Terrific. You've got such a way with words." And behind her, I could see my wife, Amanda, going like, and I was like, "Of course, you also have to earn a living, and it's important to have something to, like Wallace Stevens worked in an insurance company." But yes, yeah, I too, like, when people say, "Oh, I want to be a writer," I'm like, good luck with that, pal. Like it's hard. It's much harder than when we were younger. Like it's just hard to make a living.
Yeah, and I blame Facebook and Google on that for that, because there was a time when you could make a decent living just writing magazine articles. You know that, I know that. It was a sustainable living, and now it's not sustainable at all. The same, like it takes me the same amount of weeks to write an Atlantic article as it did back in the day to write, an article for the Oprah magazine, but I'm only getting paid, a small fraction of what I got paid before.
Mark Zuckerberg now has a question. It's like, no, he doesn't. It's actually Mark Warren, your editor. And he should have asked you this long ago, but he was your editor. He says, you wrote this book through the prism of the things that go wrong, because it is a critique of the system as well as an account of your life. How much harder is it for a woman to do that than a man, and why?
Well, a woman who writes about things that go wrong will always be called a whiner, will always be, she'll be questioned. There was that, I talk about this in the book, I wrote a story for cafe.com called, there's a bug here. I was rejected from a job at the Container Store. And then the New York Times went after me saying she can't possibly be as hard up as she claims. There's got to be more of a safety net. Well, no. So when women write about tough things, we're taken to task. We're taken to task for everything. We're taken to task for our sexuality. We're taken to task for our tone. We're tone policed. One of the studies that I found in the book was a female CEO, or I think it was a female CEO and a sociologist, asked a bunch of people who had been given good evaluations from their peers. So she asked for the best evaluations you could give her, and she looked at these evaluations and she judged them for tone policing, and she found that in these really good, employee evaluations, men were taken to task for their tone 2% of the time. Women in these good evaluations were taken to task, I think it was 78% of the time. We are tone police. We are told we are full of rage, stop whining, we're hysterical. There's all sorts of words that can be thrown at us to belittle us even further.
I have one more question for you. And then unless we hear from anyone else, that may be it, or unless you have a final thought. Do you have a part of the book that you feel proudest of or most connected to emotionally? I mean, it's a long, passionate book, but I just wondered if there's one part that you feel like, really speaks for you, and sort of represents you, in microcosm. Is there one of that?
I think my relationship with Nora Ephron kind of summarizes how it was the most special to write. It reminds me of who I was at a time before I had this sort of deep, dark slide off the middle class ladder. It reminds me what I might be capable of again. And, you know, she reached out of the blue, right? She just called me and said, I read your book, Shutter Babe, and I loved it, and I'd like to take you out for lunch. And I try to pay that forward in so many ways. Like, you know, one of my daughter's friends recently sent me a short story that she wrote. And I'm constantly have Nora in my head, like, take time out of your day, do this, work on this, read it, tell her how you feel, tell her some ideas of where to sell it, because nobody's mentoring us. So we have to mentor each other.
Well, that's a great way to end, I think. And also, I'm out of questions because, you know, I'm a man and I don't have that many thoughts. I think Greenlight's going to come back in and say a series of valuable.
Yeah, hello. Thanks so much to you both for that amazing discussion. And thanks to everybody for joining us. Don't forget to buy your copy of Ladyparts in-store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. And if you missed any of tonight's discussion, or if you just want to watch it again, it will be posted to our YouTube channel. So please look out for it later on. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.